The sun hung heavy over Dry Creek Hollow, the kind of merciless heat that made even the horses stop breathing for a moment. Dust shimmered like smoke above the street, and on that street, before the cracked boards of the auction stage, two women stood in chains. Aya kept her chin high. If they were going to sell her like livestock, they'd at least have to look her in the eyes while doing it. Her sister Tala stood beside her, smaller, quieter, her hands trembling just enough for Aya to notice. The sound of iron links brushing together was the only thing that moved the air. "Lot number 4, the auctioneer barked. His voice cracked in the heat. Two Apache sisters, healthy, strong, unbroken. "Starting at $20. Laughter rose from the crowd. Men in sweat-stained hats, women clutching parasols to shade themselves from the truth of what they were seeing. Someone spat. Another man called out, "You selling mules or wives?" Aya's face burned, but she didn't look away. She told herself she'd stop shaking, that she'd stay upright no matter what. Pride was all she had left, and pride, at least, couldn't be bought. Beside her, Tala whispered, "Don't hate them, Aya." Aya almost smiled. Even now, her sister could still whisper mercy into the dust. "I don't hate them," she murmured back. "I just won't let them forget me." The bidding began, fast, cruel. Coins clinked, boots shifted, the air thickened. Then it slowed. The crowd's noise dulled into a low hum, until one voice, steady and quiet, cut through the heat. "I'll pay 30, the man said. Heads turned. A stranger leaned against a post near the hitching rail, coat black as tar, hat brim shadowing his face. He wasn't dressed for town work, no banker, no lawman. Dust covered his boots and silver glinted faintly at his belt. 30? The auctioneer echoed, startled. "You sure, mister?" "They ain't!" The man pushed off the post, walking forward. Each step fell like a measured heartbeat. "I said 30. Silver coin." He dropped the pouch onto the plank table. The weight of it silenced the jeers. For a moment, even the wind stopped. Aya watched him closely. His eyes, gray, unreadable, didn't wander over her like the others did. He just looked plain and human, as if seeing someone who'd simply been forgotten. "Sold," the auctioneer cried, half relieved, half afraid. The chain was passed down, and the man, this drifter, wrapped his rough hands around it. Aya expected him to pull, to lead them like cattle. Instead, he hesitated, loosening the grip. "Come on," he said softly. "Let's get you out of here." The crowd murmured as they walked past. She could feel the stairs crawl over her back like heat from the sun. Each step felt heavier, but there was something strange, almost steady, in the way he walked. At the edge of town, Tala stumbled. He stopped immediately, crouched, and lifted the weight of the chain from her wrist. "You hurt?" She shook her head, dazed. He nodded once, and for the first time, Aya heard kindness in a man's silence. "Why'd you do it?" she asked finally, her throat dry. He didn't look at her. "Because nobody else would." The words fell like cool water over hot stone, simple, unadorned, and real. They kept walking until the town noise faded into the wind. The sun began to lower, turning the desert gold, and the sisters followed the man who'd bought them, but treated them like free people. Aya's wrists still ached. But something deeper, some corner of her heart that had gone still months ago, started to move again. She didn't know his name, only that he walked like someone who'd lost more than he'd ever say. And as the shadows lengthened over the sand, she wondered if maybe, just maybe, the road ahead might hold more than dust. The chain still clinked faintly as they disappeared beyond the ridge, but for the first time it sounded less like captivity and more like promise. The storm came in the afternoon, not rain, but wind. It carried sand and bitterness across the flats, tearing at eyes and skin alike. Elias walked ahead, coat whipping around his legs, guiding the two sisters along the narrow trail that led toward the hills. By the time they reached the cabin, the light had turned the color of old brass. The place stood alone, a weathered shack of pine and stone, its roof patched with tin and hope. Smoke still clung to the stovepipe from the morning fire. Aya stopped a few yards back. "This your home?" she asked. Elias gave a small nod. "For now. It keeps the wind out." Tala looked around. The rough corral, the old water barrel, the lone mare chewing on dry grass. Her shoulders relaxed a little. "It's quiet." "Too quiet most days," he said. He unlatched the chain from their wrists. The sound of metal hitting dirt seemed to echo louder than the wind itself. Aya rubbed at the red marks on her skin, unsure whether to thank him or curse him for the confusion in her chest. "You can rest inside," he said simply, turning toward the cabin door. Aya narrowed her eyes. "You paid for us. That means you want something." He stopped, hand on the latch. "I want the roof fixed before winter," he said. "You can start there." For a heartbeat, she didn't know whether to laugh or hit him. The corner of his mouth twitched, almost a smile, but not quite. He stepped inside without waiting for her answer. The cabin smelled of pine smoke, dust, and coffee long gone cold. There were only 3 things of comfort: a pot-belly stove, a low cot, and a rough-hewn table with 2 tin cups. Tala knelt near the stove, hands outstretched to the faint warmth. Aya stood by the doorway, ready to bolt if he made a wrong move. Elias poured a little water from a canteen into a cup, set it in front of her. "You can drink or throw it. Either way, it's yours." She hesitated, watching him. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't waiting for gratitude. He was just tired, the kind of tired that lives deep, under the skin. She took the cup and drank. Tala's voice broke the quiet. "Why'd you help us?" Elias sat on the edge of the cot, elbows on his knees. "Guess I've seen enough bad men win for one lifetime." Aya tilted her head. "You think this makes you better?" "No," he said softly. "Just makes me able to sleep." Something in his tone cut through the dust that had built around her heart. She looked away first, staring at the stove's faint glow. Later, when the wind calmed, Elias set a small lantern on the table. The light softened his features, revealing a scar along his jaw, a story he wasn't about to tell. "You can take the bed," he said. "Floor's fine for me," Tala smiled faintly. "You'll freeze." "Been colder," he replied. Aya crossed her arms. "We don't need your charity." "Good," he said. "Then call it a trade," she blinked. "For what?" "Roof needs mending. Fence too. You work, you stay." "That's fair." He blew out the lantern halfway, leaving just enough light to paint their faces in gold and shadow. Aya studied him through the dim glow, this man who spoke like a riddle and treated them like equals. Part of her wanted to trust him. The other part remembered every man who'd smiled before taking something. But as Tala dozed off against the wall and the wind outside softened to a low hum, Aya realized the silence here was different. It wasn't empty. It was safe, she whispered, almost to herself. "Maybe we'll see morning, Elias." Half asleep, murmured from the cot. "That's the plan." The room fell still again, save for the faint rattle of the stove and the tired breath of 3 souls who had survived too much to dream, yet somehow did anyway. Outside, the storm passed, leaving the first stars trembling above the desert. Inside, the fire caught a little stronger, as if it, too, had decided to stay. Morning came slow in the hills. The light slipped through the cracks of the cabin walls, golden and shy, as if it, too, wasn't sure it belonged there. Elias was already outside, sleeves rolled, hammering a loose plank back onto the fence. The rhythmic sound carried into the cabin, solid, honest, the kind of sound that made a place feel alive again. Aya stirred from sleep on the cot, listening. For the first time in months, she'd woken without flinching. She didn't know whether to thank the silence or blame it for how exposed she suddenly felt. Tala was already up, stirring a pot by the stove. She'd found some dried beans and a bit of cornmeal. "He keeps things neat," she said softly, as if afraid to disturb the morning. Aya nodded. "Too neat for a drifter," Tala smiled. Maybe he wasn't always drifting. Outside, Elias paused to wipe sweat from his brow, unaware that 2 pairs of eyes followed him through the window, one cautious, one quietly grateful. By midday, the air shimmered with heat again. Elias came in carrying a bucket of water from the creek, his boots caked in red dust. Aya looked up from the table she was scrubbing. "You could have waited. I was going to fetch it." He set the bucket down with a soft thud. "You'd have spilled half of it," he said. Her eyebrows shot up. "You think I can't carry water?" "I think the creek bed's slick after last night's wind," he said evenly. "Didn't say you couldn't." The corner of her mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but close. She hated that he could speak plain and still sound like he'd won something. Tala stepped between them, handing him a tin cup. "Here," she said, voice gentle. "Drink before you 2 fight over dust." He nodded, taking it. "Smart one, your sister," Aya muttered. "Don't encourage her." The moment passed with the faintest laughter, the first real one to echo inside that cabin. That evening, the wind turned cool. Elias fixed the stovepipe while the sisters mended a torn blanket. Tala hummed softly, a tune from home, low and steady, like a prayer without words. Aya caught herself watching Elias again. He worked slow, deliberate, like a man who'd once done things fast and regretted it. The scar on his jaw caught the firelight, and she wondered what kind of fight had left it there, and what kind of man had chosen not to talk about it. "Why do you stay alone out here?" she asked suddenly. He didn't look up. "Peace suits me, peace or guilt." He stopped tightening the pipe. For a long breath, the only sound was the fire. Then he said, "Sometimes they're the same thing." Aya looked down at her hands, realizing she understood more than she wanted to. Later, when Tala had fallen asleep, Elias sat outside on the porch, whittling a small piece of wood. The night sky stretched wide, stars sharp as nails. Aya joined him quietly, wrapping her shawl tighter. "You planning to keep us here forever?" she asked. He shook his head. "You can leave any time." She hesitated. "And if we do?" He blew wood dust from his hands. "Then I hope the wind's kind to you." For a moment she saw it. Not pity, not desire, but a deep, steady care. The kind that came from pain, long made peace with. Aya leaned against the post, eyes on the stars. No one's been kind without reason before. Elias half smiled. Then maybe it's time someone was. The fire inside flickered through the open doorway, painting them both in amber light. Aya didn't speak again, but her shoulders eased. For the first time, the cabin didn't feel borrowed. It felt shared by the time the lantern burned low. The only sound was the steady breath of three souls no longer strangers, just people learning, in their own quiet way, how to belong. Outside, a coyote called into the dark, and the wind carried its cry through the valley. Not mournful this time, but alive. The wind carried whispers before anyone rode up. Out here, news always traveled faster than truth. Elias knew the sound of a posse long before their horses showed on the ridge, the sharp rhythm of hooves, the metallic jingle of purpose. He stood from the corral fence, wiping sweat from his brow, eyes narrowing against the glare. Aya and Tala stepped out of the cabin, their faces pale under the morning light. Aya's hands tightened around the edge of her shawl. "You expecting company?" He didn't answer right away. "Not the kind that brings pie," he said finally. Dust clouds rose behind the riders as they drew closer. 5 men, the sheriff among them, gray coat flapping like a crow's wing. The kind of men who came not for law, but for order. Their kind of order. They dismounted slow, the way men do when they think they already own the place. The sheriff tipped his hat without warmth. "Mornin', Ward." Elias nodded once. "Sheriff, got word you've been keeping company," the man said, eyes sliding toward the sisters. "Strange company for a man who used to work with decent folk." Aya straightened her spine. "We're not company. We're workers," the sheriff chuckled. "Is that what you call it now?" Elias's jaw clenched. "You watch your mouth." The laughter in the group faltered. There was something about Elias's calm that unnerved men used to shouting. The sheriff stepped forward. "Look, I ain't here to stir trouble, but folks in town are talking, saying you bought these women, saying maybe you ain't done with what you paid for." Elias's eyes darkened, not with rage, but something quieter, a kind of grief. "I paid to keep them from worse. That's all." "Then prove it," the sheriff said, voice hardening. "Send them back. Let the town decide what's right." Aya felt heat rise in her chest, not from fear, but from the insult buried in his tone. She stepped in front of Elias. "You'd rather we belong to someone cruel than owe safety to a man you don't understand." The sheriff's hand brushed the butt of his gun. "Careful, miss." Elias's voice came low, steady. "You'll leave now, or what? Or I forget what peace looks like." For a long moment, only the wind moved. Then the sheriff spat into the dust, swung into his saddle, and said, "This ain't done. You can't change what folks already believe." As they rode off, Aya turned to Elias. "You didn't have to—" He cut her off gently. "They were going to twist the truth no matter what I said." That evening, the cabin felt smaller. The quiet that once brought comfort now pressed against their chests. Tala sat by the window, threading a torn sleeve. Aya stared into the fading fire. "You could have told them we'd go," she said softly. "Would have saved you trouble." Elias shook his head. Wouldn't have saved you. Aya's throat tightened. Why do you keep doing that? Taking blame that ain't yours? He met her eyes, tired but unflinching. Because someone once didn't, and I watched good people get crushed for it. The fire crackled, throwing sparks into the dark. Aya looked away, unable to decide whether his kindness felt like salvation or punishment. Tala broke the silence, her voice barely a whisper. Maybe it's time we go anyway. Folks will come back. Elias didn't argue. He only nodded, the smallest of movements, like a man who knew that some storms can't be stopped, only waited out. By nightfall, the sisters packed what little they had. Aya paused at the doorway, her hand brushing the frame. Elias stood behind her, shadow long and still. You should go, he said quietly. She turned, heart sinking at the sound of those words from him. And what about you? I'll stay. Someone's got to keep the light burning. Their eyes met. Two people who'd learned how to trust too late. She wanted to say something, but all that came was a whisper. You'll freeze alone. He almost smiled. Been colder. Then she stepped into the darkness, and the door closed behind her with a sound that felt final. Outside, the wind rose again, scattering dust and moonlight alike. Inside, Elias stared at the empty space where warmth used to sit, the fire flickering low, not yet gone, but close. And for the first time in years, he wished for morning to come slow. The sandstorm came like an old memory, uninvited, relentless, impossible to ignore. Elias could see it crawling across the flats from the ridge, a wall of gold and grief swallowing the horizon. He pulled his coat tight, shielding his face from the wind, but his mind was far away, out there with them. It had been 3 days since Aya and Tala left. 3 nights since the door closed on words he hadn't known how to say. And now, as the wind rose, something deep in him, something older than reason, said they were still out there, caught in the storm that neither forgiveness nor pride could stop. He saddled the mare without a second thought. The animal trembled under his hand, nostrils flaring at the scent of dust. I know, he muttered. Me too. He rode into the storm. The world vanished into a blur of sand and noise. Grit filled his teeth, his eyes, his lungs. He could barely see the land he'd crossed 100 times. Only shapes, flickers of shadow, and the thought of 2 women who didn't deserve another cruel ending. He found them near the dry creek bed, huddled against a fallen wagon. Tala was half-conscious, her hair caked with dust. Aya knelt beside her, trying to shield her from the wind, her shawl whipping like torn wings. When she saw him through the haze, her face crumpled, not in weakness but relief. You shouldn't have come, she shouted over the wind. Elias swung down, pulling his coat around both sisters. Should have said that before I missed you. Aya stared at him, the words striking harder than the storm. She wanted to be angry, wanted to call him foolish, stubborn, but all she could feel was the warmth of his hands on her shoulders. They waited out the storm together, pressed against the wagon, the world roaring around them like punishment and mercy all at once. When it finally passed, the desert was quiet again, blank and clean, as if the earth had been stripped down to truth. He built a small fire in the lee of a rock, the flames trembling in the pale morning light. Tala slept under his coat. Aya sat nearby, silent, watching the glow reflect in his eyes. You could have died, she said finally. So could you. She shook her head. You can't keep saving people just to prove something. He poked the fire with a stick. Didn't ride out to prove. Rode out to finish what I started. Aya looked at him, her heart heavy with all the things she'd misunderstood. You started by buying us, she said. But you ended by giving us back to ourselves. He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that belonged to a man who didn't believe he deserved thanks. Maybe we all bought something that day, he said. Freedom don't come cheap. She felt tears sting her eyes, but the wind dried them before they fell. By the time they reached the cabin again, the air smelled of rain. Real rain this time. The clouds rolled in slow and heavy, turning the dry hills silver. Elias set Tala on the cot, then stood back as Aya looked around the small room, once a refuge, now a home. Everything was as they'd left it. The lantern, the tin cups, the old chain rusting on the wall. She reached out, touched it lightly. We should throw it away. Elias shook his head. Leave it there. Let it remind us what not to forget. Tala stirred and smiled weakly. We came back, she whispered. Aya glanced at Elias. No, she said softly. He came for us. The rain began to fall, slow at first, then steady, washing the dust from the window panes, from their clothes, from the ache that had settled in all of them. Elias moved to the door, watching the land drink what it had long been denied. Aya joined him, their shoulders almost touching. "What now?" she asked. He thought for a moment, eyes on the rain. "Now we live. Quiet, maybe. Honest, if we can manage it." A smile broke through her weariness. "That's enough." He turned slightly toward her, the firelight flickering across his scar, softening it into something human. "You're home now," he said quietly. And for the first time it felt true, for all of them. Outside, the rain kept falling, steady as forgiveness, and the desert, the cruel empty desert, began slowly to bloom.